The dust-colored sky threatened rain as Gabriella Martin stood at the weathered porch of her family's farmhouse, clutching the foreclosure notice in her trembling hands. 2 months. That was all the time she had left before the Callaway Bank would seize the only home she had ever known. The land her father had worked until his dying day just 3 months prior. It was 1876, and the promise of prosperity that had drawn so many westward seemed to have skipped over the Martin homestead entirely. Gabriella folded the paper neatly, tucking it into the pocket of her faded work dress. At 23 years old, she had never imagined she would be facing such impossible odds alone. The drought had devastated their crops, and her father's illness had drained what little savings they had managed to accumulate. Now, with $500 owed to the bank and not even $50 to her name, Gabriella knew that without a miracle she would lose everything. "Miss Martin," the voice caught her by surprise. Gabriella turned to see Mrs. Perkins, the elderly woman who lived on the neighboring property, walking up the path to her house. Her weathered face was creased with worry. "I heard about the notice," Mrs. Perkins said, her voice low and sympathetic. "It's shameful what that bank is doing. Your father was a good man." "Thank you, Mrs. Perkins," Gabriella replied, forcing a smile. "But I'm not giving up yet." The older woman squeezed her hand. "You're strong like your mother was, God rest her soul, but Gabriella, this land, it's too much for one person. Have you considered selling part of it?" Gabriella shook her head firmly. "This land has been in my family since before I was born. I can't just give it away." "Not giving away, child, being practical," Mrs. Perkins sighed. "At least think about it. I hear Thomas Reed is looking to expand his holdings. He might give you a fair price." The thought of selling to Thomas Reed made Gabriella's stomach turn. The wealthy rancher had been circling her father's land like a vulture, making increasingly aggressive offers even before his death. Now that she was alone and vulnerable, Reed had become bolder, his proposals thinly veiled threats. "I appreciate your concern," Gabriella said, "but I'll find another way." After Mrs. Perkins left, Gabriella walked out toward the barn where her remaining livestock, a milk cow, 2 horses, and a handful of chickens were housed. The farm had once been thriving, with fields of wheat and corn stretching toward the horizon, but drought and debt had reduced it to a shadow of its former glory. Inside the barn, Gabriella grabbed a pitchfork and began turning the hay with more force than necessary, her frustration finding an outlet in physical labor. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she worked, and tears mingled with the moisture on her face. "I won't lose you," she whispered to the empty barn. "I promised him I wouldn't." The next morning brought no relief from her worries. Gabriella rose before dawn, as she always did, to milk the cow and tend to the chickens. The routine was comforting, even as the specter of foreclosure loomed over every moment. As she was returning from the well with a bucket of water, Gabriella noticed a cloud of dust rising from the road that led to her property. Her heart sank, thinking it might be Reed or someone from the bank coming to pressure her again. She set down the bucket and smoothed her apron, determined to face whoever it was with dignity. The rider who emerged from the dust was not Thomas Reed, nor was he one of the bank's representatives. He was a stranger, tall and broad-shouldered, riding a magnificent chestnut stallion. As he approached, Gabriella could see he wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy: worn denim, a faded shirt, and a hat pulled low over his eyes to shield them from the sun. "Morning, madam," he called, his voice deep and resonant. He tipped his hat respectfully as he reined his horse to a stop a few yards from where she stood. "Good morning," Gabriella replied cautiously. "Can I help you?" The man dismounted with the easy grace of someone who had spent most of his life on horseback. Up close, she could see that he was younger than she had first thought, perhaps in his late 20s. His face was tanned from the sun, with a strong jaw and eyes the color of a summer sky. "Name's Isaac Blackwood," he said. "I'm looking for work, and I heard at the general store in town that the Martin place might be hiring hands for the season." Gabriella's heart sank. "I'm afraid whoever told you that was mistaken. I can't afford to hire anyone right now." She hesitated, then added, "I'm Gabriella Martin. This is my farm, but things are difficult at the moment." Isaac nodded, his expression unreadable. "I understand. Times are hard all over." He glanced around at the property, taking in the neglected fields and the weathered buildings that needed repair. "Seems like you could use an extra pair of hands, though." "I could use a lot of things, Mr. Blackwood, but I have no means to pay for them," Gabriella replied with more sharpness than she had intended. To her surprise, Isaac smiled. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines and bringing a warmth to his eyes that caught her off guard. "I'm not asking for money, Miss Martin," he said. "Just a place to stay and meals while I work. I've been on the trail for a while and I could use a roof over my head for a spell." Gabriella regarded him skeptically. "Why would you work for nothing but room and board? What's in it for you?" Isaac shrugged. "A man gets tired of sleeping under the stars after a while, and I've worked farms before grew up on one back in Missouri. I know my way around crops and livestock." She should refuse him, Gabriella knew. Taking in a stranger was risky, especially for a woman alone. But the farm was dying around her, and she couldn't manage it all by herself. If this man was willing to work in exchange for food and shelter, it might be the lifeline she needed. "I can offer you the bunkhouse," she said finally. "It's small, but it's clean, and I can provide meals. But I should warn you, Mr. Blackwood, this farm is facing foreclosure. In 2 months, it might not be mine anymore." Isaac's expression grew serious. "How much do you owe, if you don't mind me asking?" $500, Gabriella said, the sum heavy on her tongue. He let out a low whistle. "That's a considerable amount." "It is," she agreed. "My father took out a loan last year for new equipment and seed. Then the drought came and he fell ill. There was no crop to sell and the medical bills." She trailed off, unwilling to share more of her troubles with this stranger. Isaac was quiet for a moment, then nodded decisively. "Well, Miss Martin, I accept your terms. Room, board, and a chance to help save this farm." "I didn't offer that last part," Gabriella pointed out. "No, madam, you didn't," Isaac replied with another of those transformative smiles. "I'm throwing that in for free." Despite her misgivings, Gabriella found herself returning his smile. There was something about Isaac Blackwood that inspired confidence, a steadiness that she hadn't realized she was desperately needing. "The bunkhouse is this way," she said, turning toward a small structure near the barn. "It's not much, but it'll be fine," Isaac assured her, leading his horse behind them. "I've slept in worse places." The bunkhouse was a simple one-room building that had housed the farm's workers in better times. It contained 4 narrow beds, a pot-bellied stove for heat, and a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs. A layer of dust covered everything. It had been months since anyone had stayed there. "I'll need to clean it up a bit," Gabriella said, suddenly embarrassed by the state of the place. "Don't worry about that. I can take care of it," Isaac said. He set his saddlebags on one of the beds and looked around with an approving nod. "This is more than adequate, Miss Martin. Thank you." "You can call me Gabriella," she said, surprising herself with the offer of familiarity. "Gabriella," he repeated, and something in the way he said her name made her cheeks warm. "And I'm Isaac to my friends." "Well, Isaac," she said, "I hope you don't regret your decision." "I rarely regret my decisions, Gabriella," he replied with quiet confidence. And I have a feeling this one will turn out just fine." As she walked back to the house, Gabriella couldn't help but wonder about the mysterious cowboy who had appeared out of nowhere, offering help when she needed it most. It seemed too good to be true, and in her experience, things that seemed too good to be true usually were. But for now, she would accept the assistance and worry about the consequences later. The next morning, Gabriella awoke to the sound of hammering. She dressed quickly and hurried outside to find Isaac already at work, repairing the loose boards on the barn's exterior. "Good morning," he called when he saw her. "Hope I didn't wake you too early." "No, I'm usually up with the sun," she replied, watching as he efficiently drove nails into the weathered wood. "You didn't have to start so soon." "No time like the present," Isaac said cheerfully. "I checked on your livestock. The cow needs better feed if you want her milk production to improve, and one of your horses has a stone bruise on his front hoof. I've cleaned it out, but he'll need to rest for a few days." Gabriella stared at him, impressed despite herself. "You've been busy." "Just getting acquainted with the place," he said. "After breakfast, I thought I'd take a look at your fields, see what can be salvaged." "Not much, I'm afraid," Gabriella admitted. "The drought hit us hard last year, and I haven't had the resources to plant much this season." Isaac nodded thoughtfully. "There's still time for certain crops, and with some work, we could have this place producing again by next season." "If there is a next season for me here," Gabriella reminded him. "There will be," Isaac said with such conviction that she almost believed him. "Now, about that breakfast." Over the next week, Isaac worked from sunrise to sunset, tackling the most pressing repairs around the farm. He fixed fences, patched the roof of the main house, and began preparing one of the fields for planting. Gabriella worked alongside him when she could, impressed by his knowledge and his seemingly inexhaustible energy. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, too tired for much conversation but comfortable in each other's company. Sometimes Isaac would tell stories of his travels. He had been to California during the gold rush, had worked cattle drives in Texas, and had even spent time with the Cheyenne in the territories to the north. "How did you end up here?" Gabriella asked one evening as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Isaac was silent for a moment, his eyes on the horizon. "I've been wandering for a long time," he said finally. "Never staying in one place too long, but I'm getting tired of the road." "So you decided to stop at a failing farm with a desperate woman," Gabriella said with a wry smile. Isaac turned to look at her, his gaze intense. "I decided to stop at a place that needed help, with a woman who wasn't willing to give up. There's something admirable in that, Gabriella." His words warmed her in a way that had nothing to do with the lingering heat of the day. "Thank you for saying that," she murmured. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm just being stubborn, holding on to this place when everyone tells me to let it go." "Stubborn isn't always a bad thing," Isaac replied. "Not when it's for something worth fighting for." The conversation shifted to lighter topics, but Gabriella found herself watching Isaac more closely, noticing the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, and how his hands, though rough from work, moved with surprising gentleness when he spoke. It was dangerous, she knew, to feel this growing attraction to a man she barely knew, a drifter who might disappear as suddenly as he had appeared. But in the quiet moments of the evening, with the scent of summer in the air and Isaac's deep voice spinning tales of far-off places, Gabriella allowed herself to imagine a different future than the one that had seemed inevitable just a week ago. The following Saturday, Isaac suggested they go into town for supplies. "We need seed for that south field," he explained, "and your pantry's running low. Plus, I noticed your dress is torn, might be good to get some fabric to mend it." Gabriella was touched by his thoughtfulness. I can manage with what I have for now, she said. Money's too tight for extras. Isaac's expression turned determined. I have some savings, he said. Not much, but enough for necessities. I can't take your money, Gabriella protested. Think of it as an investment, Isaac countered. In this farm's future. After some debate, they reached a compromise. Isaac would purchase the seed and supplies needed for the farm's improvement, while Gabriella would use what little money she had for personal necessities. They hitched up the wagon and set off for town, the morning sun warming their backs. Mill Creek was a small but growing settlement with a main street that boasted a general store, a bank, a saloon, and a handful of other businesses. As they drove into town, Gabriella noticed people watching them with curious eyes. It had been weeks since she had come to town, and never in the company of a man like Isaac. Folks are staring, she murmured, suddenly self-conscious. Let them, Isaac replied with an easy shrug. Small towns run on gossip. Gives them something to talk about over dinner. At the general store, Isaac loaded their wagon with seed, tools, and feed while Gabriella selected a few essentials: flour, sugar, coffee, and a length of sturdy cotton fabric for mending. As she was paying for her items, the storekeeper, Mr. Wilson, leaned across the counter. "Heard you got yourself some help out at the Martin place," he said, his eyes darting to where Isaac stood examining a display of work gloves. "Where'd you find him?" "He found me, actually," Gabriella replied, uncomfortable with the man's prying. "He's been a godsend." Wilson's eyebrows rose. "Just be careful, Miss Martin. Man shows up out of nowhere, offering to work for next to nothing. Folks might wonder what he's really after." Before Gabriella could respond, a new voice joined the conversation. "Why, Miss Martin, what a pleasure to see you in town." Thomas Reed stood in the doorway, his expensive suit and polished boots marking him as a man of means. His gaze swept over her, then fixed on Isaac with calculating interest. "Mr. Reed," Gabriella acknowledged coolly. "I was just finishing my shopping." Reed moved closer, ignoring her hint that the conversation was over. "I was sorry to hear about your financial troubles," he said, his voice pitched low but still audible to those nearby. "My offer to purchase your land still stands. In fact, I'm prepared to be quite generous, given your circumstances." Gabriella felt heat rise to her face. "As I've told you before, Mr. Reed, the farm is not for sale." "Everything has a price, Miss Martin," Reed replied, his smile not reaching his eyes. "It would be a shame to lose it all to the bank when you could walk away with something to start fresh elsewhere." Isaac appeared at Gabriella's side, his presence solid and reassuring. "I believe the lady has made her position clear," he said, his tone polite but firm. Reed's eyes narrowed as he assessed the newcomer. "And you are?" "Isaac Blackwood," Isaac replied, extending his hand. "I'm working with Miss Martin to improve her farm." Reed ignored the offered hand. "Is that so? Well, Mr. Blackwood, you should know that you're investing your time in a lost cause. That land will be mine one way or another." "We'll see about that," Isaac said calmly. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a farm to get back to." He placed a protective hand at the small of Gabriella's back, guiding her past Reed and out of the store. Once outside, Gabriella released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you," she said. "Thomas Reed has been trying to buy our land for years. He owns most of the surrounding properties already." Isaac's expression was thoughtful as he helped her into the wagon. "Men like Reed don't like being told no," he observed. "How far do you think he'd go to get what he wants?" Gabriella considered the question. "I don't know," she admitted. "He's always been persistent, but lately he's become more aggressive, especially since my father died." "Has he threatened you?" Isaac asked, his voice sharpening. "Not directly," Gabriella said. but there have been incidents, cattle getting loose, a fire in one of the outbuildings that started under suspicious circumstances. Nothing I could prove was his doing. Isaac's jaw tightened as he climbed up beside her and took the reins. I think it's time we had a serious conversation about the future of your farm, Gabriella, and about Thomas Reed. The ride back to the farm was quieter than their journey into town. Gabriella could sense Isaac processing what he had learned, his usual easy demeanor replaced by a focused intensity that she found both reassuring and somewhat intimidating. When they arrived home, Isaac insisted on unloading the supplies himself while Gabriella prepared lunch. As she worked in the kitchen, slicing bread and cheese and brewing fresh coffee, she found her thoughts returning to the confrontation with Reed and to Isaac's protectiveness. It had been a long time since anyone had stood up for her that way, and the memory of Isaac's steady presence at her side brought a smile to her face. After lunch, they sat at the kitchen table, the remains of their meal pushed aside as Isaac spread out a piece of paper and began sketching a rough map of the farm. "From what I've seen," he said, his pencil moving across the paper, "this land has good potential. The soil in the south field is rich, and with proper irrigation, you could grow almost anything there. The west section is perfect for grazing, and if we repair the old irrigation channels, we could divert water from the creek to help during dry spells." Gabriella watched him work, impressed by his knowledge and vision. "It sounds wonderful, Isaac, but all of that takes money I don't have." Isaac set down his pencil and looked at her directly. "I do," he said simply. Gabriella blinked in surprise. "What? I have money," Isaac repeated. "Not a fortune, but enough to make a significant investment in this farm. Enough to pay off your debt to the bank and fund the improvements we need to make this place profitable again." Gabriella stared at him, unable to process what he was saying. "But why would you do that? You barely know me." Isaac's expression softened. "I know enough," he said quietly. "I know you're a woman of courage and determination. I know this land means everything to you, and I know that with the right partner, this farm could be something special." "Partner," Gabriella echoed, her heart beating faster. "That's my proposal," Isaac said, his eyes never leaving hers. "A partnership. I invest my savings, we work the land together, and we share in the profits. Equal partners." It was an incredible offer, more generous than anything Gabriella could have hoped for. Yet something in his words nagged at her. "And if I refuse?" she asked cautiously. Isaac leaned back in his chair, his expression carefully neutral. "Then I'll help you as much as I can for as long as I can and wish you well when I move on." "Just like that," Gabriella pressed. "You'd walk away from your investment, from all the work you've already put in." "It would be your choice," Isaac said simply. "I'm offering a partnership, Gabriella, not a takeover. I don't want to be Thomas Reed trying to force you into a decision you don't want to make." Gabriella studied him, searching for any sign of deception or ulterior motive. But all she saw in Isaac's clear blue eyes was sincerity and something else, a warmth that made her breath catch. "I need time to think about it," she said finally. Isaac nodded. "Of course. Take all the time you need." He stood, gathering up his sketch. "Meanwhile, there's plenty of work to be done." As he headed for the door, Gabriella called after him. "Isaac, wait." When he turned back, she asked the question that had been troubling her since his arrival. "Why are you really here? What made you stop at my farm, of all places?" Isaac hesitated, then said, "Let's just say I recognized something in you that I've been looking for a long time." Before she could ask what he meant, he was gone, leaving Gabriella with more questions than answers and a proposal that could change her life forever. That night, as Gabriella prepared for bed, she found herself at her bedroom window, gazing out at the bunkhouse where a lamp still burned. What was Isaac doing? Planning more improvements to her farm, or perhaps writing to someone about the desperate woman he had found and the opportunity her failing farm presented. She chided herself for the cynical thought. In the 2 weeks since his arrival, Isaac had given her no reason to doubt his intentions. He had worked tirelessly, treated her with respect, and now offered a solution to her financial troubles that would allow her to keep her home. Yet the question remained, why? What had brought this skilled, resourceful man to her door just when she needed him most? And what did he mean when he said he had recognized something in her? With a sigh, Gabriella turned from the window. She would not find answers tonight, and tomorrow would bring another day of hard work. As she slipped into bed, her thoughts drifted to the feeling of Isaac's hand on her back as he guided her past Reed, the quiet strength in his voice when he defended her, and the intensity in his eyes when he proposed their partnership. Partner. The word held so many possibilities, some of which Gabriella was only beginning to acknowledge to herself. The next morning, Gabriella woke to the sound of voices, angry voices coming from the yard. She hurriedly dressed and rushed outside to find Isaac confronting 2 men she recognized as Thomas Reed's ranch hands. "I'm only going to say this once more," Isaac was saying, his voice controlled but threaded with steel. "This is private property. You have no business here." "We're just delivering a message from Mr. Reed," one of the men drawled, his hand resting casually on the gun at his hip. "He wants to remind Miss Martin that his offer won't stand forever, and that bad things tend to happen to people who don't know when to give up." "Is that a threat?" Isaac asked, taking a step closer to the men. "Just passing along information," the second man said with a smirk. "Mr. Reed is a concerned citizen, worried about a woman living out here all alone. Anything could happen." Gabriella moved to stand beside Isaac. "You can tell Mr. Reed that I'm not alone," she said firmly, "and his concern is neither needed nor wanted." The first man's eyes narrowed. "You're making a mistake, madam. Mr. Reed isn't a patient man." "Neither am I," Isaac interjected. "Now get off this property before I forget my manners." There was a tense moment when Gabriella thought the men might refuse, but something in Isaac's stance must have convinced them that pursuing the confrontation would be unwise. With muttered curses, they mounted their horses and rode away. Once they were out of sight, Gabriella turned to Isaac. "This isn't your fight," she said softly. Isaac's expression was grim as he watched the dust settle on the road. "It is now," he replied. "Reed is escalating, sending men to intimidate you as crossing a line." "What can we do?" Gabriella asked, fear and frustration mingling in her voice. Isaac turned to face her, determination evident in every line of his body. "We fight back," he said. "Not with threats or violence, but by making this farm too successful for Reed to touch, by building something he can't tear down." "Together?" Gabriella asked, thinking of his proposal. "Together," Isaac confirmed, and there was a promise in the word that went beyond business arrangements and land improvements. Gabriella took a deep breath, her decision made. "Then I accept your offer of partnership, Isaac Blackwood." The smile that spread across his face was like the sun breaking through clouds. "You won't regret it, Gabriella Martin," he said, holding out his hand. As her hand met his, Gabriella felt a current of something powerful pass between them, a connection that transcended their new business arrangement. For the first time in months, hope bloomed in her heart, as vibrant and unexpected as wildflowers after rain. The next few weeks brought a flurry of activity to the Martin farm. True to his word, Isaac paid a visit to the bank in Mill Creek and settled Gabriella's debt in full, returning with the canceled mortgage and a look of satisfaction that made her heart skip a beat. Together, they drew up a formal partnership agreement, with the help of a lawyer from the next town over who owed Isaac a favor. With the immediate threat of foreclosure removed, they turned their attention to revitalizing the farm. Isaac's experience proved invaluable as they replanted the south field with fast-growing crops that could be harvested before winter. They repaired the irrigation system, cleaned out the well, and built new pens for the livestock Isaac insisted they would soon be able to afford. Gabriella found herself working harder than she ever had, but with a sense of purpose and optimism that had been missing since her father's death. And working alongside, Isaac brought an unexpected joy to each day. He was patient in his teaching, respectful of her knowledge of the land, and quick to praise her contributions. In the evenings, their conversations grew longer and more personal. Isaac spoke of his childhood on a farm in Missouri, of losing his parents to influenza when he was 17, and of his years of wandering, searching for a place that felt like home. Gabriella shared memories of her parents, of growing up as an only child on the farm, and of her dreams for the future. "I always thought I'd have a family of my own by now," she admitted one night as they sat on the porch, watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness. "But then my mother died and my father needed me, and somehow the years just slipped away." "It's not too late," Isaac said quietly, "for any of your dreams." Gabriella glanced at him, caught by the intensity in his gaze. "What about your dreams, Isaac? What are you looking for?" He was silent for a long moment, his eyes on the distant horizon. "Peace," he said finally. "A place to belong, someone to share it with." The words hung in the air between them, charged with meaning neither was quite ready to acknowledge. But as the weeks passed and summer gave way to early autumn, the connection between them deepened, evolving from mutual respect to genuine affection, and, though unspoken, something more. It was harvest time when Thomas Reed made his next move. Isaac and Gabriella had been working from dawn to dusk, gathering the crops from the south field. The yield was better than either had dared hope, promising a profit that would allow them to expand their operations in the coming year. They were returning from the field, tired but satisfied with the day's work, when Gabriella noticed smoke rising from the direction of the barn. "Isaac!" she cried, pointing. Without hesitation, Isaac broke into a run, Gabriella close behind him. As they approached, they could see flames licking at the wooden structure, already consuming one wall and threatening to spread to the roof where hay was stored. "The animals!" Gabriella gasped, heading for the barn door. "No," Isaac caught her arm. "It's too dangerous, I'll get them." Before she could protest, he had vanished into the smoke-filled building. Gabriella stood frozen, heart pounding with fear, until the sound of frightened livestock broke her paralysis. She ran to the well, frantically drawing water and filling buckets to fight the blaze. Minutes that felt like hours passed before Isaac emerged, leading the horses and cow to safety. His face was streaked with soot, and he was coughing from the smoke, but his expression was one of grim determination as he returned to the barn to rescue the remaining chickens. With the animals secured, they turned their attention to the fire itself. A few neighbors, seeing the smoke, arrived to help, forming a bucket brigade from the well to the barn. The flames had spread to the roof by then, and Gabriella watched in horror as years of work and investment burned before her eyes. It was nearly nightfall before they managed to extinguish the last of the flames. The barn was a charred ruin, most of their stored hay was lost, and many of their tools had been destroyed. As the neighbors departed with promises of help in the coming days, Gabriella sank onto a stump, exhaustion and despair washing over her. Isaac sat beside her, his shoulder touching hers in silent support. "We'll rebuild," he said softly. "It's just a setback." "It wasn't an accident," Gabriella said, her voice hollow. Was it? Isaac's expression hardened. No. I found evidence that someone had deliberately set the fire oil-soaked rags near where it started. Raid, Gabriella whispered. He's trying to force me to sell. Us, Isaac corrected. He's trying to force us, but he's underestimated who he's dealing with. Gabriella looked at him, struck by the determination in his voice. What do you mean? I mean, Isaac said, taking her hand in his, that I'm not going anywhere, Gabriella. Whatever Reed throws at us, we'll face it together. I promise you that. The conviction in his words and the warmth of his hand around hers gave Gabriella strength she didn't know she possessed. Together, she agreed, her fingers tightening around his. That night, as they cleaned up in preparation for bed, Isaac insisted on checking the house and outbuildings one last time. Just to be safe, he said, though they both knew he was looking for signs of further sabotage. When he returned to the house, his expression was troubled. Nothing immediate, he reported, but we need to be vigilant. I'll sleep on the porch tonight, keep watch. Don't be ridiculous, Gabriella protested. You're exhausted and it's getting cold at night. There's a spare bedroom upstairs, it was my father's. You can stay there. Isaac hesitated, clearly concerned about propriety. Gabriella, people will talk if I stay in the house. Let them, she said, echoing his words from their trip to town. We're partners, Isaac, and right now we need to protect each other and this farm, that's all that matters. After a moment's consideration, Isaac nodded. All right, but just until we're sure it's safe. The arrangement was meant to be temporary, but as days passed without further incident, it began to feel natural having Isaac in the house. They settled into a domestic routine, sharing meals, discussing plans for the farm, and enjoying quiet evenings by the fire. Though Isaac continued to insist on sleeping in the spare room, their growing closeness was undeniable. One evening, as Gabriella was preparing supper, Isaac returned from town with surprising news. I spoke with Sheriff Davis about the fire, he said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. He's reluctant to investigate Reed without more evidence, but he did tell me something interesting. Gabriella set down the potato she was peeling. What's that? Reed's been buying up land all around the county, forcing out small farmers through whatever means necessary, Isaac explained. But he's not keeping the land for ranching. He's selling parcels to the railroad. Gabriella frowned in confusion. The railroad? But there's no line planned through here. Not yet, Isaac said. But according to the sheriff, Reed has connections to the Central Pacific. They're planning a new spur line from Sacramento, and they need right-of-way through this valley. Understanding dawned on Gabriella. And our farm sits right in the middle of the proposed route. Isaac nodded grimly. Which explains why Reed is so determined to get this land, and why he's willing to go to such lengths. The railroad will pay him a fortune if he can deliver the entire valley. So what do we do? Gabriella asked. Isaac's expression turned thoughtful. We have options. We could fight, take what we know to the authorities, try to expose Reed's methods. Or, Gabriella prompted, or we could negotiate, Isaac suggested. If the railroad wants this land badly enough, maybe we can strike a deal directly with them, cut Reed out entirely. Gabriella considered this. Wouldn't that mean giving up the farm? Not necessarily, Isaac said. We could sell them a right-of-way across the property, retain ownership of the rest. With the railroad coming through, the value of this land would increase substantially. We could use the money to rebuild, maybe even expand. It was a pragmatic solution, one that would allow them to keep their home while turning Reed's scheme to their advantage. Yet Gabriella felt a strange reluctance. This land had been her family's for generations. The idea of any part of it passing to strangers, even for a good price, felt like a betrayal. I need to think about it, she said finally. Isaac nodded in understanding. Of course, it's a big decision. But Gabriella, he added, his voice softening, whatever you decide, remember that this is your home. I'm just here to help you keep it. The humility in his words touched Gabriella deeply. Despite their partnership, despite all he had invested in the farm, Isaac still saw it as her place, her heritage. The realization only deepened her growing feelings for him. Our home, she corrected gently. You've earned that much at least. The look that passed between them then was charged with unspoken emotion, a current of feeling that had been building since the day Isaac rode onto her land. For a breathless moment, Gabriella thought he might close the distance between them, might finally give voice to what was growing between them. But the moment passed as the kettle on the stove began to whistle, breaking the spell. Isaac stepped back, clearing his throat. I should check on the livestock before dark, he said, and was gone before Gabriella could respond. Left alone in the kitchen, Gabriella pressed a hand to her racing heart. It was becoming increasingly difficult to deny her feelings for Isaac, feelings that went far beyond gratitude or even friendship. But she couldn't be sure he felt the same, and the risk of misreading the situation, of potentially damaging their partnership, was too great. The next morning, Gabriella rose early and found Isaac already at work, splitting wood with focused intensity. She watched him for a moment, admiring the strength and grace in his movements, before approaching with a cup of coffee. You're up early, she observed, handing him the steaming mug. Couldn't sleep, Isaac admitted, setting down the axe to accept the coffee. Too much on my mind. About Reed and the railroad, Gabriella asked. Isaac took a sip of coffee before answering. Partly, he said, but also about us, Gabriella. Her heart skipped a beat at the seriousness in his tone. What about us? Isaac set the coffee mug on a nearby stump and turned to face her fully. I need to be honest with you about something, he said. About why I came here. Gabriella steeled herself, suddenly afraid of what he might reveal. I'm listening. It wasn't by chance that I ended up at your farm, Isaac began. I heard about your situation from a friend in Sacramento, a banker who knew your father. He mentioned that John Martin's daughter was in danger of losing her family's farm, and I decided to come see if I could help. Gabriella frowned, trying to process this information. You came here deliberately to help a stranger. Yes, Isaac said simply. I'd been looking for a place to settle down, to invest my savings in something meaningful. When I heard about your situation, it seemed like an opportunity to do some good while finding the home I'd been searching for. So it was just business? Gabriella asked, unable to keep the hurt from her voice. No, Isaac said firmly. The business aspect was my excuse to come here. But from the moment I met you, Gabriella, it became about much more than that. He took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. I didn't expect you, he continued softly. I didn't expect to find a woman of such courage and determination, of such kindness and strength. I didn't expect to wake up each morning eager to see your face, to hear your voice, to work alongside you and build something together. Gabriella's breath caught as Isaac reached out to take her hands in his. I didn't expect to fall in love with you, he finished, his voice a low, intense murmur. Time seemed to stop as his words hung in the air between them. Gabriella stared at him, scarcely able to believe what she had heard. Love, she whispered. Love, Isaac confirmed, his thumbs tracing gentle circles on the backs of her hands. I love you, Gabriella Martin. I think I've loved you since that first day when you stood on your porch and told me you weren't giving up on this farm. Joy welled up in Gabriella's heart, so intense it was almost painful. Isaac, she began, but words failed her. Instead, she did what she had been longing to do for weeks. She stepped forward and kissed him. The touch of his lips on hers was gentle at first, tentative, but quickly deepened as Isaac released her hands to wrap his arms around her waist, drawing her closer. Gabriella wound her arms around his neck, losing herself in the warmth and strength of him, in the overwhelming rightness of being in his embrace. When they finally parted, both breathless, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I take it you feel the same way," he said, a smile in his voice. "I love you," Gabriella confirmed, the words coming easily now that they had been released. "I think I've been falling in love with you since the day you rode up and offered to help save my farm." "Our farm," Isaac corrected, echoing her words from the previous evening. "Our farm," Gabriella agreed with a smile. "Our home." They might have remained in that embrace for hours if not for the sound of approaching horses. Reluctantly separating, they turned to see Thomas Reed himself riding toward the house, flanked by two of his men. Isaac moved protectively to Gabriella's side as the riders approached. "Stay behind me," he murmured. "Not a chance," Gabriella replied, squaring her shoulders. "We face him together." Reed reined in his horse a few yards away, his expression contemptuous as he surveyed the partially rebuilt barn and the field still showing signs of recent harvest. "Miss Martin," he greeted coldly before turning his gaze to Isaac. "Blackwood, I see you're still hanging around." "This is my home now, Reed," Isaac replied evenly. "I'm not going anywhere." Reed's eyebrows rose. "Is that so? Well, that complicates matters." He glanced at Gabriella. "I've come to make you one final offer for this property, Miss Martin, twice what it's worth in cash. More than enough to start fresh somewhere else." "The answer is still no," Gabriella said firmly. "This farm is not for sale, not to you, not to anyone." Reed's face darkened with anger. "You're making a mistake," he warned. "Things happen to people who stand in my way. Bad things." "Like barn fires?" Isaac asked pointedly. "You should know, Reed, that we've spoken to Sheriff Davis and to representatives of the Central Pacific Railroad. They're very interested in hearing about your methods of acquiring land." For the first time, Reed looked uncertain. "You're bluffing," he said, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "Am I?" Isaac countered. "The sheriff may not have enough evidence to arrest you yet, but the railroad doesn't need proof to reconsider their business relationship with you. They're not fond of scandals, I hear." Reed's jaw tightened as he assessed the situation. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "For you to leave us alone," Gabriella replied. "For good. And if you ever try to harm us or this property again," Isaac added, "we'll make sure everyone from here to Sacramento knows exactly what kind of man Thomas Reed really is." The threat hung in the air, its implication clear. Reed's reputation was his most valuable asset in his dealings with the railroad and other powerful interests. If that reputation were tarnished, his ambitions would be severely damaged. After a tense moment, Reed nodded curtly. "Fine. Keep your worthless farm. But don't expect any favors from me or anyone associated with me." "We never have," Gabriella said coolly, with a final glare. Reed wheeled his horse around and rode away, his men following close behind. As the dust settled in their wake, Gabriella released a shaky breath. "Do you think he'll really leave us alone?" she asked. Isaac wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "I think he's too smart to risk his reputation and his railroad deal," he said, "but we'll stay vigilant just in case." Gabriella leaned into his embrace, drawing strength from his presence. "We still need to decide what to do about the railroad," she reminded him. "We do," Isaac agreed, "but not today. Today I just want to celebrate." "Celebrate what?" Gabriella asked, looking up at him. Isaac's smile was warm and full of promise. "Us," he said simply, before lowering his head to kiss her again. In that moment, with the sun warming their backs and the land stretching out around them, land they had fought for, and would continue to nurture together. Gabriella knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as one. And that was worth celebrating indeed. As autumn deepened into winter, the Martin farm, now officially the Martin Blackwood farm, underwent a transformation. With Reed's threats neutralized and their partnership flourishing, Gabriella and Isaac were free to focus on building their future together. The barn was fully rebuilt before the first snow, larger and sturdier than before. Isaac's connections in the livestock business allowed them to acquire several fine breeding cattle at a favorable price, the beginning of what they hoped would become a successful herd. The profits from their harvest, modest though they were, provided enough capital to see them through the winter months and plan for spring planting. But the most significant change was in the farmhouse itself, which had once felt too large and empty for Gabriella alone, but now resonated with warmth and laughter. Isaac had moved from the spare bedroom to the master bedroom as Gabriella's husband. Their wedding had been a simple affair, held in the town church with a few neighbors as witnesses. Gabriella had worn her mother's dress, carefully altered to fit her slimmer frame, and Isaac had purchased a new suit for the occasion. The celebration afterward, held at the farm, had brought together people from miles around, curious to meet the mysterious cowboy who had won Gabriella Martin's heart and helped save her family's legacy. Now, as Christmas approached, Gabriella found herself happier than she had ever imagined possible. Marriage to Isaac had brought not only security and partnership, but a depth of love and passion that took her breath away. Each day brought new discoveries about her husband: his quiet sense of humor, his unwavering integrity, his unexpected tenderness. One snowy evening, as they sat before the fire in the parlor, Isaac working on plans for spring planting while Gabriella mended a shirt, he looked up suddenly and said, "I've been thinking about the railroad offer." Gabriella set down her sewing. After their confrontation with Reed, they had indeed been approached directly by representatives of the Central Pacific, who had offered a substantial sum for a right-of-way across a corner of their property. They had asked for time to consider the proposal. "And," she prompted. "I think we should accept," Isaac said. "The route they are proposing would take only a small portion of the south pasture, land we're not using efficiently anyway. And the money," he hesitated. "The money would secure our future, Gabriella. We could expand the herd, improve the irrigation system, maybe even hire help for the busy seasons." Gabriella nodded slowly. Over the past months, she had come to see the railroad not as a threat but as an opportunity. "I agree," she said. "And having a rail line nearby would make it easier to get our cattle and crops to market." Isaac smiled, relief evident in his expression. "I was worried you might still have reservations," he admitted. "This land has been in your family for so long." "And it will remain in our family," Gabriella said firmly. "Our children will grow up here, Isaac. They'll learn to ride and farm and raise cattle on this land, just as I did. Selling a small piece of it to ensure that future seems like a wise decision to me." Isaac's eyes softened at her mention of children. "Our children," he repeated, setting aside his papers to move closer to her on the sofa. "You know, we should probably start working on that part of our plan." Gabriella laughed as he took the mending from her hands and set it aside. "We've been working on it quite diligently, if I recall," she teased. "Practice makes perfect," Isaac murmured, pulling her into his arms. As his lips found hers, Gabriella surrendered to the familiar warmth of his embrace, to the love that had transformed her life from one of struggle and uncertainty to one of joy and promise. The following spring brought two significant arrivals to the Martin Blackwood farm: the railroad construction crews, who began work on the new spur line that would connect their valley to markets across the country, and the news that Gabriella was expecting their first child. Isaac received both announcements with equal enthusiasm, though his joy at the prospect of fatherhood far outweighed any satisfaction derived from their business dealings. He became even more protective of Gabriella, insisting she rest frequently and hiring a local girl to help with household chores. "You're fussing unnecessarily," Gabriella protested one afternoon as Isaac urged her to sit in the shade while he completed the fence repairs she had started. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, you know, most of them while continuing to work." "Not my wife," Isaac said firmly. "Not when I'm here to take care of things." Gabriella sighed but complied, secretly touched by his concern. As she watched him work, strong hands deftly manipulating tools, she marveled at how completely her life had changed in just 1 year. Last spring, she had been facing the loss of everything she held dear. Now, she was happily married, expecting a child and co-owner of a thriving farm with prospects that grew brighter each day. The railroad money had indeed transformed their operations. They had purchased additional cattle, hired seasonal workers, and improved their farming equipment. The new barn housed not only livestock, but a workshop where Isaac pursued his previously undisclosed talent for carpentry, crafting furniture for their home and occasionally for sale in town. Even Thomas Reed had been neutralized as a threat. True to his word, he had left them alone, focusing his attention on other ventures now that his railroad scheme had been partially thwarted. Occasionally, they would see him in town, but he pointedly ignored them, a situation that suited them perfectly. As Gabriella's pregnancy progressed, their happiness only deepened. Isaac spent his evenings crafting a cradle for the baby, while Gabriella prepared a nursery in the small room adjacent to their bedroom. Their discussions turned increasingly to the future, to the world they wanted to create for their child, to the values they hoped to instill. "I want our children to know the satisfaction of working the land," Gabriella said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "To understand that true wealth comes from what you build, not what you take." "They will," Isaac assured her, his hand resting protectively on her growing belly. "And they'll know the importance of standing up for what's right, of protecting those you love. Like you protected me," Gabriella murmured, covering his hand with her own. Isaac's expression grew serious. "I would do anything for you, Gabriella. For you and our child. You know that, don't you?" "I do," she said softly. "Just as I would for you." Their lips met in a gentle kiss, a reaffirmation of the bond that had grown stronger with each passing day. As they sat together in the gathering twilight, the first stars appearing in the darkening sky, Gabriella felt a sense of peace and completion that transcended anything she had ever known. In late October, as the harvest was being gathered and the first frost silvered the fields, Gabriella gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him John, after her father, with the middle name James in honor of Isaac's father. The birth was difficult but ultimately uncomplicated, with the assistance of the local midwife and Isaac, who refused to leave Gabriella's side despite tradition dictating that men should wait elsewhere. "He's perfect," Isaac whispered, cradling his son with a tenderness that brought tears to Gabriella's eyes. "Look what we made, Gabriella. Look at our son." "He has your eyes," Gabriella observed, though in truth the baby's eyes were still the unfocused blue of all newborns. "And I think he'll have your smile." "God help him if he has my stubborn nature," Isaac replied with a chuckle. "Between the two of us, this child is destined to be the most strong-willed person in the territory." Gabriella laughed, then winced as the movement caused a twinge of pain. "Strong-willed isn't so bad," she said. "It's what brought us together after all." Isaac gently placed their son in her arms before sitting on the edge of the bed. "No," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "What brought us together was something much more powerful than stubbornness. It was fate, Gabriella. I was meant to find you, to love you, to build this life with you." Gabriella looked up from their child's face to meet her husband's gaze. "I believe that," she said softly. "I believe we were meant to be together, to face whatever comes our way as one." "Always," Isaac promised, leaning down to kiss her forehead, then their son's. "Always and forever." As winter settled over the farm, bringing with it short days and long, cozy evenings by the fire, the Martin Blackwood family established new traditions. Christmas was celebrated with a small tree cut from their own land, decorated with homemade ornaments and candles. Friends from neighboring farms visited to meet baby John and share in their joy. The railroad line was completed in the spring, bringing with it increased commerce and opportunity. As Isaac had predicted, having easier access to markets improved their prospects significantly. They were able to sell their cattle and crops at better prices, and the small town of Mill Creek began to grow as new businesses were established to serve the increased traffic. By John's first birthday, the farm had expanded to include a small orchard, additional grazing land purchased from a neighbor who was moving east, and a new team of draft horses that made plowing and harvesting more efficient. Isaac had taken on an apprentice, a young man from town who showed promise as both a farmer and a carpenter. "I've been thinking," Isaac said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching John toddle unsteadily across the yard, "that we might want to consider building a bigger house." Gabriella looked at him in surprise. "A bigger house? Why?" Isaac smiled, his eyes following their son's determined explorations. "Well, this one might get a bit crowded if we keep adding to our family, and I thought maybe we could incorporate some modern conveniences, indoor plumbing, for instance." "Are you planning on adding to our family soon, Mr. Blackwood?" Gabriella asked with a raised eyebrow. Isaac's smile widened as he turned to look at her. "That depends, Mrs. Blackwood. How do you feel about giving John a little brother or sister?" Gabriella's heart swelled with love for this man who had ridden into her life and changed it so completely. "I think," she said, moving to sit beside him and taking his hand in hers, "that would make me very happy." Isaac's arm wrapped around her shoulders, drawing her close. "Then that's what we'll do," he said simply. "We'll build a bigger house, fill it with more children, and continue making this farm the best in the valley." "Together," Gabriella murmured, resting her head on his shoulder. "Together," Isaac agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Always together." As the sun set on another day at the Martin Blackwood farm, painting the sky in fiery hues that gradually faded to the deep blue of evening, Gabriella reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From the desperation of impending foreclosure to the abundance they now enjoyed, from the wariness of strangers to the depth of love they now shared, it had been a transformation as dramatic as the changing seasons, yet as natural as the turning of the earth. And as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, as John's laughter floated on the evening breeze, as Isaac's strong hand held hers in a promise that needed no words, Gabriella knew with absolute certainty that this farm, this family, this love was exactly where she was meant to be. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys to the Martin Blackwood farm. The new house was built, a spacious two-story structure with modern conveniences that became the envy of the county. Their family grew with the addition of twin girls, Grace and Emma, born 2 years after John, and later, another son they named William. Isaac's carpentry business flourished alongside their farming operations, with orders coming from as far away as Sacramento for his finely crafted furniture. Gabriella, despite the demands of motherhood, remained an active partner in the farm's management, her keen mind for business complementing Isaac's practical knowledge of agriculture and animal husbandry. The railroad that had once threatened their way of life instead became instrumental in their prosperity, connecting them to markets across the country and bringing new settlers to the valley. Mill Creek grew from a dusty outpost to a thriving town with a school, a proper church, and businesses that served the surrounding farms and ranches. Thomas Reed eventually left the area, his ambitions taking him to San Francisco, where, ironically, he became a respected businessman with investments in shipping and manufacturing. His departure removed the last shadow from their happiness, allowing them to focus entirely on building their future. Through it all, through droughts and abundant harvests, through illnesses and recoveries, through the everyday challenges of raising a family and running a farm, Isaac and Gabriella's partnership remained unshakable. Their love, born in a time of crisis, tested by adversity, and strengthened by shared purpose, became the foundation upon which everything else was built. And on summer evenings, when the work was done and the children were settled, they would often sit on the porch of the house Isaac had built with his own hands, watching the sunset and marveling at the life they had created together. Did you ever imagine it would turn out like this? Gabriella would sometimes ask, her hand in his, her head resting on his shoulder. When you rode up that day, did you know what we would become? And Isaac, looking out over the prosperous farm that had once been on the brink of ruin, at the children who carried their shared legacy, and at the woman who had captured his heart with her courage and determination, would always reply the same way. I knew you were worth fighting for, Gabriella. Everything else was just a blessing I never expected, but will always be grateful for. And in those words, in the love they contained and the journey they commemorated, was the true story of the Martin Blackwood farm, a story of resilience and renewal, of partnership and passion, of a debt that threatened everything and the love that saved it all.